প্রকাশ শুরু করো। Good evening, everybody. Today, our organization organized by one day special lecture. Today's topic: religious tolerance in Asoka and the Buddha. This discussion chaired by Dr. Pradip Basu, former professor, Department of Political Science, ex-Dean of Arts, Presidency University, and main speaker Dr. Ajay S. Sekhar, Associate Professor of English, founder, coordinator, Center for Buddhist Studies, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kerala. Welcome you, sir, and welcome Ajay Sekhar, sir. Pradip Basu, sir, please discuss and analysis this topic. Over you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Like other times, I first of all thank রাষ্ট্রবিজ্ঞান চর্চা কেন্দ্র, political science and its organization, Professor Shamiran Das and many others. It goes to their credit that they have been running this initiative for last 3 years. They have conducted more than 300 seminars, mostly in Bangla, also in English, and sometimes in the form of interviews. They have helped the poorest students in the remote corners of West Bengal. Also, they extend financial help. 1,000 teachers and PhD students are associated with religious tolerance in the thought of Emperor Asoka and also in the teachings First of all, I will introduce our respected guest, Dr. Ajay S. Sekhar. Professor Sekhar, do you pronounce it as Sekhar or Sekhar?
Sir, Sekhar.
Sekhar. Okay. In Bangla also we pronounce it as Ajay S. Sekhar. Let me introduce Professor Sekhar, although very briefly. He is a faculty in English, and he has written several research papers in national and international journals on Buddhism, and he has enormous knowledge in Buddhism and the empire, the administration, the culture, the social structure of the empire of Ashoka. We know that Chandragupta Maurya, in Bangla we call it Mourjo. Anyway, Chandragupta Maurya, he was a great emperor, and his son was Bindushar, and Emperor Ashoka was the son of Bindushar. Ashoka died in 232 BC, nearly 2200 years ago from now. His exact date of birth is not yet known for certain. There are debates about it, but he lived for 80 years. He set up different edicts in stones, engraved in stones, and he gave the instructions of a secular, tolerant empire. He unified most of the northern parts, northern, northwestern, and northeastern, eastern, central parts of India. And he had good relations with Chola kings in the south. Uh, just one second. Uh, a little more, which I forgot to mention, about Professor Ajay Sekhar up there. He is the Associate Professor of English and founder coordinator of Center for Buddhist Studies at Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kerala. His works are on intersectional issues of caste and gender in Indian literatures, cultures, and societies. His recent works include the critical studies in the modernity and Renaissance culture of Kerala and its foundations in ancient South Indian Tamil Sangam culture and Ashokan Buddhist civilization. We are very grateful to Professor Sekhar that he has taken out some valuable time from his busy schedules. Long back, on another occasion, we had invited him, and he gave a lecture, I now remember. Anyway, I invite Dr. Sekhar to start his lecture.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. And Good evening to all, Professor Pradip Basu, and the members and participants of the Chacha Karyakram. I thank you all for this invitation and the occasion to speak about the Buddha and Ashoka the Great, and whose teachings and whose edicts are actually sustaining the culture of tolerance, religious diversity, pluralism, and democracy in the country. So, once again, I salute you all, and also uh, in this critical juncture when the country is going through unprecedented forms of churnings and democratic kind of crisis and problems and challenges. It would be the ideal occasion to talk about the rudiments of democracy in the country as the chief architect of our constitution. Baba Sahib Ambedkar has explained and revealed again and again that it is from the sanghas of his master, the Buddha, that he has taken the fundamental values of modern democracy, that is, liberty, equality, and fraternity, from the teachings of the enlightened one, the Buddha, who is considered as his master, along with Mahatma Phule and also the Sufi poet Kabir. So anyway, it's a great occasion to remember the contributions and the lasting kind of values that we find in the teachings of the Buddha, in the words of the Buddha that are enshrined in the Tipitaka or the Pali canon of the three baskets, the Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidharma Pitakas, and also in the edicts. In first person itself, you will find the thoughts of Ashoka revealed. Emperor, that Mauryan emperor, revealed his mind through his edicts, through writings on the stone. He has made it a kind of immortal kind of presence. Even after, as Professor Basu has explained, even after 2,200 years, even after 2,600 years in the case of the Buddha, we can decipher those things. We are thankful to the Europeans. We are thankful to the Britishers, James Spencer and Alexander Cunningham, and all those pioneers of Indian archaeology during the colonial times in 19th and early 20th century. They have actually recovered and deciphered the words of Ashoka and his writings on the Buddha, so that these personalities, greatest personalities of the world, are recognized, and they are really rehabilitated into our records of history and the understanding of the Indian culture. So it is in Ashoka that we find this culture of pluralism and tolerance, which are lacking in the country today. Because of the rise of the right wing politics here, because of the rise of the Hindu nationalism here, various forms of ultra nationalisms and cultural forms of nationalisms, cultural and linguistic forms of supremacisms and otherizations of the minorities, demonization, and a systematic kind of otherizations and erasure of the presence was majority of people that happened in the country in recent times as part of this cultural nationalism that has been on the rise from the colonial, again from the colonial time onwards, late 19th century onwards. As people from Bengal, you may know better than me that this otherizing nationalism, this jingoistic Hindu nationalism, has its origin in the also in the Bengal modernity paradigm itself. At the wake of imperialism, we have the writings of Bankim Chandra, Vivekananda, and Aurobindo in particular, that actually created this culture of Hindu self and Hindu nationalism, a chauvinistic and aggressive and even militant form of Hindu uprising and nationalism, we will find in the Bengal Renaissance. So anyway, from there to the Tilak in late 19th and early 20th century, to Patel, and even in Gandhi, we find this kind of tradition of the Ramraj, a tradition of the Hindu popular myths and images that are being imbibed and used by the dominant form of nationalism for the mobilization of the people anyway. It's having many dimensions. This is not the context to uh, uh, come deeper, go deeper into those things. Anyway, I'm just briefing you about the context of the rise of the Hindu nationalism in India. But unfortunately, this parochial, as Rabindranath Tagore himself has revealed, this jingoistic parochial nationalism is not exactly the culture of India. If you consider the ancient India, Professor Romila Thapar and others, R.S. Sharma and others have revealed it for us. If you consider and study keenly, systematically analyze the traditions of India, we find it as a pluralistic tradition. And from ancient times onwards, from the Indus Valley period onwards, from at least BC, say 4000 or 5000, that era onwards, we had a tradition of Shramanic culture in India. It's not just the Vedic culture that was established somewhere between or around BCE 1500 and the decline of the Indus Valley civilization, that was a Dravidian civilization. We have witnessed it. So if you consider and reconsider and rethink the Indian traditions from the Indus Valley onwards, we will find that it's a pluralistic tradition. It's a people's tradition. You have the Shramanic culture or the Shramana or Amana culture. That means the culture of the heretic groups, the critical thinkers, and the people's Bahujan traditions. So there you have the Buddhist tradition, the pre-Buddhist traditions, the tradition of the pre-Buddhas, the tradition of the Tirthankaras, and the Nirgranthis, as Ashoka calls them, addresses them in his edicts, the Nirgranthis or Nigandhis in Prakrit Pali. They are called Nigandha, means Nirgrantha. That means those who denied the Brahmanical Vedas. They are called the Nirgranthis or the Jains. So Nirgranthi or Nigandha was used by Ashoka in his edicts in BC 3rd century to refer to the Jain sects of India. The Jain Shramanic tradition. The Shramanic tradition is basically divided into the Jain groups, the Buddhist groups, and the Ajivika groups. Ajivikas are the Epicurean kind of more materialistic kind of philosophers, and they became extinct by the 10th or 11th century CE in India. But the Jain groups, they continued. Even today, we have in South Canada and many places in India, we have the Jain in Rajasthan or Gujarat or many parts of India. Even in South India, we have the Jain traditions and life cultures. And so the Jain groups were here and the Buddhist groups were here. So they are predominantly, they form the what you call the Shramana culture. Shramana culture also means the working culture. Shramana means those who do a lot of struggle and strife and hard work. Shrama means a hard work, labor, and efforts. So the human endeavor of labor you have in the Shramana culture. So this is an epistemological and philosophical and cultural kind of dichotomy and antagonism in the history of India. You have the Brahmanical Vedic culture on one side that was established in India towards BCE 1500, and that also marks the decline of the Indus Valley ancient Dravidian civilization. And you have that Shamanic struggle, the struggle of the Jains and Ajivakas and Buddhists against this. There were many other minor sects as well. You have the Charvaga, you have the other kind of traditions. Plenty of other traditions were also there. But anyway, predominantly the Brahmanical Vedic culture, which is focusing on the four Vedas and the Brahmanas and the Upanishadic tradition, and then the Shruti, later the Shruti Smriti Purana tradition that became dominant. And by the 4th and 5th century CE, that has become the mainstream and the common sense in North India. So that is how, by the Gupta rule, by the 5th century, you have a proper so called Hindu or Brahmanical culture that was established. We have evidences about the Hindu temples from the 5th century CE onwards, and beyond that, you don't have. In the Vedic culture, there is no tradition of the temple, there is no tradition of that kind of ritualism. You have only the Vedic chantings and the Vedic kind of what you called traditions based on verbal and memory. That kind of chanting tradition is so anyway, all these art and architectural constructive traditions were taken from the Shramana culture, from the Jain and the Buddhist kind of cultures in India, taken over and adopted and assimilated by Hindu Brahmanism that has become hegemonic by the 5th century CE. Anyway, Brahmanism has got its upper hand in the North Indian region from towards the end of the BCE era, soon after Ashoka. Buddha lived in BC 6th and 5th century. Ashoka lived in the BC 3rd century. And in the 2nd century itself, soon after Ashoka, the last Buddhist emperor, the last Mauryan emperor, that is Brihadratha Maurya, who is a descendant of Ashoka, he was assassinated through cheat by the militia chief called Pushyamitra Sunga. And that ended the Mauryan Buddhist legacy of India. The Mauryan Empire was collapsed, and you have the rise of the Brahmanical Hindu kind of dynasty called the Sunga or the Shunga dynasty under Pushyamitra Sunga. So from that time onwards, that happened somewhere around BC 2nd century, 1 century after Emperor Ashoka. So from that moment onwards, you have the codification of the Hindu Brahmanical law, the Shruti Smriti traditions, according to Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Even the Manusmriti, Yajnavalkya Smriti, and 18 such Smritis were actually codified and fabricated by Brahmanical patriarchy to actually legitimize this kind of taking over and killings, the killing of the so-called Kshatriya king in Brahmanical Varnashrama terms by the Brahman militia or chieftains. So anyway, from the age of Manusmriti, that is towards the end of the BCE era and at the beginning of the Common Era, CE era, we find the rise of the Smriti, Shruti traditions and the Puranic culture of Hinduism, and Hinduism assuming a kind of a hegemonic kind of status, and you have the Varnashrama regime, the graded inequality, the classification of the society into fourfold varnas as watertight compartments, and then its further degradation and further deterioration into the caste system, into the castes and subcastes, thousands of castes and subcastes as we find now. That was manifested by the early Middle Ages, by the 7th or 8th century. That kind of caste system came to existence in North India already by the Gupta rule in 5th, 6th century, the rise of the Bhakti traditions also in the Shaivite and Vaishnavite forms. And in South India, only after the 7th and 8th century, we have the rise of the Bhakti cults, violent forms of Shaivite frenzy, and also Vaishnavite kind of devotion growing and replacing the Jains and Ajivagas and the Buddhists, especially the Mahayana tradition. Already the Mahayana liberal form of Bodhisattva kind of worship, that kind of Buddhism was there in South India. So it was all replaced by the Bhakti cult and frenzy. That was all facades of Brahmanical patriarchy in South India as well. So this is the brief history of India, against which we are thinking about the writing traditions of Buddhism as embellished in the edicts of Ashoka, how Ashoka adopted the dharma of the Buddha, the ethics of the Buddha, the universal principles of equality and justice, samatha and karuna and maitri, as his guiding principles of regime or his constitution, so to say, a proto-form of the constitution, as Ambedkar says. I'm taking it all: liberty, equality, fraternity, not just from the Western model or the Magna Carta or the French Revolution, but I'm actually imbibing it from the Vinaya Pitaka, the rules of the Sangha as codified by the Buddha at his time, some 2,600 years ago. So, from this time onwards, you have Ashoka imbibing the traditions after 200 years of Buddha's lives, and following the footsteps of the Buddha and going all around India, the greater India, the Indian subcontinent, and sending his own daughter and his own son, Mahinda and Sanghamitta, to various far corners of the world, to South Asia, to Ceylon, to Thailand or Malaysia, and other places in South Asia, and propagating the word of the Buddha and the philosophy of Maitri to the whole Asian regions. That is what we find during the time of Ashoka. So Ashoka, soon after that triumph in the Kalinga War, that happened, the Kalingan war site in Bhubaneswar, on the banks of that river Daya. The river itself is Daya, but unfortunately, because of that hoary war, Daya river has become red blood. It was flowing like a blood stream because of the massacre, the large-scale butchery that was practiced by the Chanda Shoga. He was a furious kind of Hindu king, Ashoka, before his conversion to Buddhism. Before embracing Buddhism, he was a genocidal kind of a dashing he-man. He was into even killing of his brothers for the post of for the throne. He has even indulged in, say, annihilation and elimination of his own brothers and other kith and kin. But after these experiences and traumas, the catastrophes of the war, after he has witnessed the calamities of this kind of a bloody war at Bhubaneswar, at the Kalinga site, which is now we have the Peace Pagoda, the World Peace Pagoda by the Japanese nuns and monks, that is now adorning that hill called Dhaulagiri. The poet Jayanta Mahapatra has written a poem on that place, Dhaulagiri. Dhaulagiri, we have a world peace stupa now. But unfortunately, that was the site of this bloody war, what we are experiencing in Palestine now. That kind of the most what you call abominable bloody pogroms were happening there. So seeing all these things, gradually he got changed. It was not exactly an overnight kind of change, but Professor Romila Thapar and now Patrick Olivelle, the historian from Texas, University of Texas, Patrick Olivelle, they have now elaborated this conversion. And it's a gradual change, taking not just days or weeks, but months and years, through years, over a couple of years. Ashoka got transformed by seeing this bloodbath. And he was also listening to the nuns and monks. The Buddhist preachers were also there. So he was also listening to their lectures and meditations and dharma talks. And therefore, he gradually assimilated into that kind of a tradition. And that's how he converted. He converted to Buddhism, and he embraced the dharma of the Buddha, the ethical principles of love and compassion and equality and generosity and mercy and karuna, maha karuna and maha maitri and maha prajna of the Buddha. And also along with it, you have the ubeka and all those associated chitta bhavas of Buddhism. So he embraced it all and became a person with generosity and mercy and he assumed the principle of non-violence, and he uh, declared that he will never touch the sword again. And he submitted his sword at the feet of the Buddhist nuns who were doing the discourses with him. And from then on, the Chandrashoga Ashoka became the Dharma Shoga. He imbibed the principles of ethics, and then he declared that the further expansion of the Magadha Empire would be through Dharma Vijaya, not through the Yuddha Vijaya, not through violence and military action, not through the sword. He has abandoned the sword forever, and he was sleeping on the floor like a common upasaka or a monk. So he abandoned all those delicacies and all those privileges and the what you call the extravagance of the palace, and he stopped hunting, and he prohibited hunting, many forms of hunting, and even fishing. He regulated even fishing. So that was a kind of public animosity against him, because the common fisher folk, they were antagonized by some of his non-violent policies of conservation. So Ashoka in world history, that is why the Western philosophers and writers and historians, they have identified him as the great. Ashoka is called the great by the Western philosophers. Western thinkers, British writers, British historians, H.G. Wells and others, they have identified him as the first person in conservation, the first emperor to assume the ethical principles of the Buddha, especially non-violence and Maitri. Universal Maitri means that universal fraternity, universal sisterhood or brotherhood as his chief principle of governance. So that kind of it's a gradual transformation, as explained by Professor Thapar and now by Patrick Olivelle. Elaborately, we can read those books, Ashoka and the Decline of the Mauryas by Professor Thapar, and the recent book, Ashoka, Portrait of the Philosopher King. Is not just a king and emperor and a champion of war and what you call imperialism or expansionism of his empire, but he is a philosopher as well. That is the important. He's a thinking king. He's a critically self-reflexive kind of a person. He criticizes himself. That is the importance of the edicts, that we find the mind of the emperor, and through the writings of the emperor, he is speaking in first person and also later generalizing. He begins with a generalized that Devanam Piya Piyadasya Soga, things like this, or believes like this, or he says this to his people, and the people are considered as his own offsprings, his own siblings and children, and kith and kin. They are his relatives. So this is the first instance, one of the rarest of rare instances in history, that an emperor whose empire was from Persia on the western side, that is Afghanistan, Kandahar, and Gandhara regions, and Cambodia and Gandhara on one side, that is almost going to the Greco-Roman world, and on the eastern side you have Bangladesh or Myanmar and that kind of East Asian nations on the other side, and from the foothills of the Himalayas, Buddha's own Lumbini and those Nepal Tarai regions to South India. He's supposed to be, he's having the last refuge in South India, like his grandfather. Professor Basu mentioned his grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, another great example of tolerance and diversity and religious pluralism. He was also in the so called Hindu Chanda tradition earlier, but towards the end of his life, he converted, like Ashoka. He also converted Chandragupta Maurya. He embraced Jainism, and he went to the south, and he came to South India, to Karnataka, and he had his what you call Santara or Salekhana, that is leaving the life with only water and sunlight. And towards the end, you will even leave water, drinking water. You will stop drinking water. You will sit in the sun looking at the north, that is the place of the Mahavira, the Tirthangara, and then you will leave your life. That is the Santara or the Salekhana, or in Tamil it is called Vadakkirikal, looking at the northern side and sitting in the Padmasana posture and living your life. So that kind of an end, like Shakespeare talking about nothing became him as the leaving it. So the leaving of the life That was done in great fashion, in great compassionate, non-violent, harmless fashion by the Jains, the Santara of the Jains. So, grandfather of Ashoka, he got that tradition from the grandfather himself. So, grandfather was a Jain, and he embraced Jainism towards the end, and he abdicated his throne, and he, along with that Jain monk, Bhadrabahu, he came to South India, to Karnataka, and at Shravana Belagola, the white pond of the Shramanas. Shravana Belagola means the pond of the white pond of the Shramanas. There he had his last times. So, likewise, it is also believed in South India. It is said that Ashoka also came to South India. Ashoka came to South India, and one of his last edicts is in South India. That is the Sannati edicts. The Sannati edicts, Sannati or Kanaganahalli in Karnataka, northern Karnataka, in the Kalaburgi district, we find a place called Sannati. We have the edict even today. It was fortunately recovered by the ASI when a Hindu temple, it was somehow it got damaged, and from underneath the debris we got the edicts of Ashoka. So that is how it was. Only in recently, only in the 1980s, it was recognized that it's the writings of Ashoka, and it is the Dharma Lipi, the Brahmi script, or the Dharma Lipi with which he has written, and he has written about the Adholoka Mahachaitya of Kanaganahalli. Kanaganahalli means the Kanagapalli, that means the golden pagoda, the golden vihara it is. And that was constructed by Ashoka because his own children, Mahendra or Mahinda in Pali. Mahendra is Sanskrit, Mahinda in Pali or Prakrit. Sankhamitra in Sanskrit, Sankhamita in Pali or Prakrit. So his own children were working in South India, in Tamilagam, in the Tamil country, what is now called Karnataka. They were there, and they were even further south to Sri Lanka. It is Sankhamita who took that botry, the branch of the botry from Gaya, from where the Buddha got enlightenment, which is called the diamond seat of the Buddha. Under the people tree, he got enlightenment, and that was revisited by Ashoka during his lifetime, some 200 years after the Buddha, and he created that diamond seat that what we see today. So the relics are even conserved there by Alexander Cunningham and others. It was Alexander Cunningham who actually re-nurtured that plant, that Bodhi tree. It was totally chopped off and cut off and destroyed, burned down by many Hindu rulers. Sunga was the first, Pushyamitra Sunga. After the assassination of Brihadratha Maurya, the first thing that he did was to cut off that Bodhi tree, the mark of the Buddha, because Ashoka has propagated the Bodhi as the symbol, the logo of Buddhism, and also the marker for the Buddha. He was not into anthropomorphic kind of worship. What we now see as the Buddha is a yaksha figure. The idol that we see is a yaksha figure that was created after the rise of Mahayana. Only after BC 2nd century, only after Ashoka, Buddha was worshipped in the form of what we call a human figure, a yaksha figure, with Ushnisha, the upper hair tuft, and the Lamba Khanda Karma, the pierced long earlobes, and a very beautiful kind of a yaksha figure is there. That came to prominence during the Mahayana times. Mahayana itself was a slight aberration from the basic teachings of the Buddha. Mahayana is a liberal form of Buddhism that was initiated by the philosophy of Nagarjuna Acharya. Nagarjuna Acharya, who lived in CE, first and second century, he actually liberalized the philosophy of the Buddha. The Buddha's original philosophy is Anitya or Anatma or Anegandavada. It's very close to the Jain principle of Anegandavada or Syadvada. Anitya means everything is in flux, everything is in change. Change is the only permanent reality of the world. There is nothing unchangeable as change itself. So everything is in change and flux. Everything is subject to change. There is no permanent existence of God or spirit or soul or the other world or so on and so forth. So therefore, everything is subject to change. Therefore, there is no Atma. Therefore, there is no permanent self. Therefore, there is no absolute self as well. So that is why Anitya is called an Atma, and it's also called Praditya Samutpada. But the world operates through a web of interrelationship. Everything is interdependent. What happens to one little being or one chain in the food chain, it will affect the other bigger organisms and other animals, or the so-called sophisticated human world will also collapse. If what happens to the little flies or butterflies or birds, it will happen to us tomorrow, like the silent spring of Rachel Carson and all. So we are all in a web of nature, an intertwined and interrelated web of life, and that is called Praditya Samutpada, dependent origination. Nothing is independent. Everything in this universe is interdependent. Somehow, the changes that is happening in one part of the universe or one organism will affect, or even one element, the change that has happened to an element in nature, that will affect the organisms as well. So that kind of interdependent origination, that is the theory of causality, cause effect rationality, and all forms of rational thinking as well. And that is also the essential teaching of the Buddha. The Kalama Sutta. The Kalama Sutta teaches us that don't believe in what people are saying. I am giving you great lectures, but don't believe in that. And don't even believe in what you read in the scripture, what is written as religion or tradition or culture. Don't believe in all those things. Do not even believe in your master, what I am saying, but you have to rationalize it all. You have to think critically in the light of the what you call all the observations you can. So you need to observe, you have to analyze, you have to critically make certain judgments and assumptions, and only rationally, through a process of the critical mind, through an exercise of reflexive and even self-critical thinking, what is good for the individual, and also for the society. You need to think of the other as well. You need to think of the sociality and the larger society or the world at large or the universal, and then accept that something that is good for you and for the other and for the whole society and the world, that you can accept. So do not believe in what people are saying or what is written down in the scripture. That is called the Kalama Sutta. And there is another great sutta called the Upali Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle discourse. Discourses on middle length, that is called the Majjhima. It is divided into the word of the Buddha was compiled much later. After centuries, it was compiled in Bali originally. In Mahayana, it's all converted into Sanskrit. That Sanskritization called eliticization and liberalization, and further deviation towards the Hindu Brahminical tradition. And by the Middle Ages, Brahmanism has again recaptured those spirits of Mahayana and Vajrayana. Even through the tantric practices, it was reabsorbed by the hegemonic tradition of Brahmanism. So, anyway, another great sutta is on tolerance, religious diversity, plurality, and respect for the other. That is, like Kalama Sutta is for reason, is for the critical mind, rationality, how to create knowledge through rational, only through reason, only through your human reason, critical thinking and analysis, observation, and formulation of certain principles, you can arrive at a verifiable, rational knowledge that is socially accepted. That is the philosophy of the Kalama Sutta. Kalama Sutta means the sutta. In Sanskrit, it is sutta. What is said in Sanskrit as sutta is in Pali called sutta. Simply, it's a simple language. In Sanskrit, you have the what you call more refined purifications and further reflections and inflexes are being added to make it more scholarly and bombastic in sound effect and pedantic. That is what happens with when Brahminical patriarchy, when the priestocratic patriarchy patronizes something, it alienates the simplicity and the what you call the frankness of the people's use. So what you find at the bottom of this Sanskrit is the prakrits, the what is devised and used by the people. So that is why the Buddha used to preach and give his sermons and lectures. The Dharma talks were completely done in people's languages, in Pali, in particular because he was teaching in the Magad region. Magad, Patliputra, the capital from the Mauryan times, Chandragupta's times to Ashokan times, to even to the last Mauryan emperor. That was the capital. So Buddha was largely teaching there. That is why he used the Prakrit of Magadha, which is called Magadhi Prakrit or Artha Magadhi or Pali. It came to be known as Pali because, like Dharmalipi, it protected the word of the Buddha. The ethics of the Buddha is explained through his word, and it was codified in Pali language. So that language protects the word of the Buddha. That is why Pali means Paripali. That kind of a thing means protecting kind of language. That is why the that became more prominent. Pali. It Arthamagathi became Pali. So anyway, I was talking about the Kalama Sutta. That was the sutta that was delivered, the discourse that was done with the Kalama people, an ethnic cultural group called the Kalama people. They were in central part of India. So the Kalama Sutta was spoken to the Kalama people. Likewise, there is another sutta called the Upali Sutta or Upali Suttam in Bali. In the Upali Suttam, Buddha is talking about religious tolerance, religious diversity, religious pluralism, and importance of humanism. After all, we are humans. We are not into these sects or religions or communal kind of things. But after all, we are humans, so we need to respect the other equally as human. And therefore, that is Upali Sutta was spoken to. It was articulated to Upali, a convert from Jainism, a young man, a young monk from Jainism. He converted to Buddhism and he became a great scholar and a head monk in the Buddha's own Sangha. And then Buddha, in a discourse, he speaks to that monk, young monk, Pali, and he says, "Hey, you are from Upali, you are from the Jain people. So you must equally respect the beliefs and faiths and philosophy of Jains. You must have respect for the teachings of the Jains. Those teachers they taught you. So you should have equal respect and reverence and acknowledgement of the other. Though you have become a full Buddhist now, you believe in the Anitya and Anatma and Anicca and all, but still you have to think about the other. You have to equally respect and acknowledge the other. So that is called a great Upali Sutta or Upali Suttam in Pali, which is about religious tolerance and diversity and equal respect to all religions and all philosophies and all what you call skepticisms and what you call non-religious thought as well. So that has become a foundational thing in what we now call as greater humanism and secularism. Secularism is this equal treatment of all religions and even non-religious or anti-religious or even rationalism that is critiquing all religions or the atheism that question the validity of a centralized god. All those thoughts can have an equal place, an equal space in society, and an equal acknowledgement of the philosophy of the other. That is what we call culture. Culture is an acknowledgement of the other. How can you talk about culture without the other? How can you talk about philosophy not in terms of the other? Even philosophy is a discourse, is an unconditional love and discourse for the other. Defines post-structural philosophers. So whether it is Foucault or Guattari or Deleuze and others, they consider even philosophy, rationalist philosophy of Europe, as a discourse towards the other. So Buddha was teaching us the primary point of the acknowledgement of the other as equal, as human, and their thought is also valid because it's all deriving from certain context and junctures and moments in history or society. So therefore, all those things are equally valid. That is the point, that philosophy of tolerance, philosophy of inclusion, philosophy of acknowledging the diversity and difference also, the place to dissent, the space to dissent and disagree and critique, that critical space of dissent and diversity, plurality, and democracy was acknowledged by the philosophy of the Buddha. That is why when Ashoka became a true Buddhist, when he completely abandoned war and violence and bloodshed, when he believed in Dharma Vijaya, when he became a Dharma Shoka, that means enlightened and saddened by the ethical principles, that a great burden was on him, on his brain. And then he also began to talk about the other. So that is why in all the edicts, in most of the edicts, you have the rock edicts and also the pillar edicts. Broadly, Ashokan edicts may be classified into the rock edicts for the people, and the pillar edicts for the royalty and the other officials and other emperors or queens on his part. So in the rock edicts, even that is divided into minor edicts and major edicts. Pillar edicts and rock edicts, and further divided into minor edicts, small ones and larger, greater ones. So in all these edicts, most of the edicts, we find the word of the other, a word to address the other. You find not only the address to the Shramana. Shramana means basically an address to Buddhists, Jains, and Ajivakas. Shramana, I told you in the beginning. And he addresses the Shramanas, and even before the Shramanas, he addresses the Brahmanas. So the Brahmanic and Vedic tradition is also acknowledged equally. That is the philosophy of Buddhism. They acknowledge the pre-traditions as well. They acknowledge the other traditions, even so-called opposing traditions, as well as equally. So that is why in all the edicts you can read Patrick Olivier and all those people, Wendy Doniger, Thapar, Arasham, all the historians of India, they have elaborately discussed the edicts, all the available edicts. Even further edicts are yet to be recovered. So in all the edicts, we find the address, equal address, not just to the people. His people are called his own children, the offsprings. Devanampiya is actually embracing all people as his kith and kin, his own children, his own issues and offspring. And he's addressing Brahmanas and Shramanas. And also all the other groups, whatever groups, even the so-called heretic groups, the heterodox traditions, plenty of such cults and sects and groups were there. And he calls them as pasanda, a typical Pakhanda or Pasanda in Pali. Even Pali is according to region, his edicts and dialects change. He used many languages, many world languages, Greek, Aramaic, Pali, Pashtun, plenty of, according to the region, many of his edicts are in China, in Tibetan region, in Kandahar, in Gandhara region, near Persia, and some of them are in South India. As I told you, the far south in Yeragudi in Tamil Nadu and in Sanadi or Kanaganahalli in Karnataka. Many other edicts were there, even in Kerala, in Vanchi or Kodungalur. Many edicts were there, many pillars were there. Almost all of them are lost. Huyan Sang, the Yuan Sang or Huyan Sang, the Chinese traveler, the Buddhist monk, he has recorded it all. Coming to Kanchipuram in Tamil Nadu, he had recorded about, from Kanchi, he has recorded about the Vanchi greater city, that is Kodungalur, today's Kodungalur or Muziris, as it is called, Muziris, the greater port of South India. And there were also many Ashokan edicts and stupas and pillars were lost. So in all these edicts, he is addressing the Brahmanas as well, along with the Shramana. And also the Pasanda. Pasanda means all the other groups, all the heterodox traditions, all the heretic groups, all the minor cults, the minorities are being addressed by the emperor. And they are also considered as central. Even in one line inscription or two line or three line inscriptions, you find a play there, or he has given an ideal space for the minorities of the empire. So that kind of inclusivity, that kind of just and equal due and adequate representation of the people, the minor sects, the minorities, and the religious different people. The religious other was acknowledged by the emperor. That makes him the great, Ashoka the great. So that kind of acknowledgement of the other and inclusion and ensuring their participation and democratic kind of representation, that was ensured by Ashoka, and that is why he is actually called Ashoka the Great, a people's leader, and who was a democratic leader, and because it originates from the philosophy of inclusion and representation by the Buddha. Because Buddha was the first to include women. Buddha was the first to include Dalit women and Shudra women. Buddha was the first to include the Shudras and Atishudras into his Sangha as equal brethren, as equal monks and nuns. And we have the greatest example in Chandaliga. Tagore has written about Chandaliga in the 1930s. Even the 1920s, Mahagavi Kumaranashan. This is the 100th anniversary of Kumaranashan's Chandala Bhikshugi and Karuna, and also Sri Buddha Charitam. These are all the last works of great poet Kumaranashan. Mahagavi Kumaranashan of Kerala in Malayalam, written in the 1920s. He passed away at the age of 51. In 1924, he passed away in a boat capsize, in a boat tragedy. But the last works of Kumaranashan, they are all dealing with Buddhism. That great work of that British poet, that Sir Edwin Arnold, The Light of Asia, that was translated into words. A free verse translation was done by Ashan, and it was published in a serial way under the title Sri Buddha Charitam, the history of the Buddha. That was done. And then Karuna, about the greater principle, and Karuna is happening in the Bengal, North Indian kind of landscape, because Ashan got his education from Calcutta. He was there for education in Calcutta. Mahagavi Kumarana Ashan in the early 20th century, from 1904 onwards to 1910, he was in Calcutta for higher education. So he got an initiation into Bangla and into the Hindi tradition and the Prakrit traditions. And also, he also got a training, initial training in English language. That actually exposed him to the Edwin Arnold's epic-like poem, The Light of Asia. That was re-rendered in poetic kind of words by Ashan as Sri Buddha Jaridam, the unfinished work. So Karuna Chandala Bhikshugi, what Tagore titled as Chandaliga, the play that we teach to Indian English kids in the classes. And that actually it came after Ashan's. 1922 is Chandala Bhikshugi, the story of Matangi. In Tagore, it is Prakriti and her mother in Tagore's Chandaliga. And in Ashan, that untouchable woman, that Dalit woman, is named as Matangi, the daughter of a Chamar leader. He makes that kind of a reference as well. So anyway, the point is that all these poets of Indian Renaissance traditions, whether Rabindranath Tagore or Gurudev of Bengal, or the Guru of Narayana Guru, Ashan's own Guru, or Ashan himself, Kumaran Ashan of Kerala, they were all these Indian poets were thoroughly shaped and influenced by the philosophy of the Buddha and the history of Ashoka, the Ashokan edicts of compassion and karuna, and religious tolerance and diversity and respect for plurality. So you can check the details. It's now available online. All the edicts of available edicts of Ashoka, the decipherment in English language is available. So we can all read and find out how he respects the other religions. The Greek, even the Greeks are mentioned. Even Buddha was having conversations with King Menander, or those people of Greek origin. They were having conversations. So the Yavana, the Greek, the Roman, the other kind of ethnic and religious groups, all of them are being named and acknowledged. And the Brahminic tradition and also the Jain tradition, the Ajivaka tradition, and all such heterodox traditions were also acknowledged consistently and constantly by the edicts, and also the Tipitaka is another example. The diversity, the ethnic and religious plurality that you have. I've just mentioned one sutta, that is the Upali Sutta, about the respect for the other religious sect. And that is what we find a constant reference to Brahmanas and the Pashandas. In Sanskrit, Pashanda, in Prakrit Pali, it is Pasanda or Pakhanda. So that reference is always there, not in a derogatory sense. It's not, the Pashanda is not used as a critical, derogatory, negative sense as it is used now, but in a very positive, inclusive sense. Ashoka uses that is very clear. Professor Thapar and Professor Oliver, Patrick Oliver, they explain it. They explain elaborately through their commentaries. We can read those books as well. So, my humble submission is that we must learn this and teach our young generation, especially at the wake of this nationalist project called NEP, which is nothing but an attack against modernity and English language by reorienting Sanskrit and Hindi, that kind of a linguistic plan and agenda of cultural nationalism is behind this NEP, and it has already destroyed the university system by undoing the MA or postgraduate studies, and also diminishing the importance of the PhD programs, and focusing and what you call projecting beyond all dimensions. The undergraduate thing is being projected. So, especially at the threat of the NEP, we must rethink about our culture and history and the great traditions of the Buddha and Ashoka on religious inclusion, diversity, and plurality, and religious tolerance for the other. That must be inculcated and given to the students, young minds in particular. So I thank the platform and also Professor Basu for this rare but very important opportunity. I thank you all the listeners and viewers of this Charcha Vedi. And let me conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sekhar, for your illuminating discussion, which is very important in today's context, as you have already mentioned, where religious tolerance is disappearing in today's context in India, while ancient Indian tradition is being glorified, but they make us forget the religious tolerance principle of ancient Indian rulers, particularly Asoka, and the teachings of Buddha. Uh, Buddha is considered by later Hindu preachers as the ninth avatar of Vishnu, a kind of appropriation. Uh, the way Buddha revolted against the Brahminical hegemony and the caste system, that has been ignored. Instead, it is projected that Ashoka made a powerful Indian state, and that is the goal of today's Indian rulers, to build up a powerful, a powerful nation state. But we understand from your elaboration that Ashoka's main principle, main goal was not a powerful Indian state, but a pluralistic, tolerant India, to build up a tolerant India. That was Ashoka's main aim. But anyway, I have a few questions. It is a very interesting discussion. We know an irresistible urge to know our own past, uh, the glorious past, not only in terms of power, but in terms of tolerance, pluralism, which you have highlighted. I have a few questions, but before that, Let the audience, let questions come from the audience. And Prakash, are you there? If there are questions, please let us know. Then at the end, I will put my questions. Prakash? Okay, perhaps he is out of network. Dr. Sekhar, in the meantime, I will ask you a question that if Ashoka was influenced by the principle of non-violence of Buddha, uh, in Bangla, we pronounce it as Buddho, but in English, it is Buddha. Anyway, uh, I was going to say that if he was influenced by the principle of non-violence and he talked about communal harmony in the sense of tolerance for other religious groups. The question is that if we put it in today's context, if there is a question of minority appeasement at the cost of the interest of the majority, and if there are conflicts, violent conflicts between the communities, how a principle of non-violence can help to maintain peace and harmony or tolerance. But in that context, can the principle of non-violence work? That is my first question. Uh, if you want, you can respond to it now.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your deep engagement with the question of nonviolence and state policy and maintaining of law and order in the vast empire. So that is a practical issue. So Buddhism is never a kind of what you call extremism. When we compare Buddhism with Jainism, you find that difference. In Jainism, in many matters, whether it is ahimsa or whether it is the compassion towards other, you have an extreme kind of way. But Buddhism believes in the middle way, the middle path. It is called the golden middle path, the golden madhya magga of the Buddha. So, in certain say crisis, in certain critical moments and crisis, we need to use certain action. So that is without which a larger nation state or an empire cannot hold. So of course he was maintaining the army, the military was there, the police was there, but it was all done with a what you called with a law and order kind of practice or a kind of setup, which we now call the constitution or the penal code of law. The penal code of law or ethics was there. And with that, in maximum, what you say, maximum non-violent way, these things were done. So that is why when he banned the hunting, there were widespread protests and many conflicts with minor groups. And when he banned or regulated, he didn't ban fishing altogether, he regulated certain kinds of fishing in certain waters, certain kind of species. He actually, the endangered species, he banned the fishing of that, regulated. He tried to regulate hunting and fishing and all. And for his own use in palace, he became a vegetarian. That's another great virtue of the emperor, whether it is non-violence or vegetarianism, all those things that are now practiced by Brahmanism were originally by the Buddhists. And in order to defeat, as D.N. Shah has revealed in the myth of the holy cow, Brahmanism has reinvented that strict form of vegetarianism in order to defeat the challenge of Buddhism. So they were into a middle path, into what I call a golden middle path. And at some points, they had to use, as an empire, as a state kind of formation, they had to use force. Of course, that was done. And to the maximum degree possible, conflicts were what you call resolved through dialogue and interaction and state kind of peaceful interventions. And of course, they had to use military force or the police force sometimes. That is also natural, that could be understood. It's the practical middle path they pursued, we can assume from the edicts and other writings on Ashoka.
Thank you, Professor Sekhar. Secondly, we know that, well, I have read that in some cases, some tribal agitations were suppressed by Emperor Asoka. Uh, I don't know whether there was any exploitation or oppression over the tribal people, which we find in today's India. Uh, in what sense this attempt, this reference to tribal unrest has been mentioned? I don't know that. I didn't understand that. But do you think that Ashoka was ready to grant equal rights to the tribal people as well? Is there any mention in his edicts? Is there any mention about the freedom and equality meant for the tribal people? Because tribal
Yes,
people constituted a very large section, even today.
right, right, right.
So, what about the tribal position?
Okay. Such unrest and what you call secessionist kind of struggles and strifes were there in many parts of the larger empire. That is natural. And in all those issues, we find Ashoka taking a more liberal position and leaving it to the what you call the governors or the ambassadors or the viceroys that he has appointed from that region. So some of the kind of violent conquests and suppressions were carried out by the local what you call the ambassadors or emissaries of Ashoka rather than he himself doing it. So we cannot blame for all those things to the emperor. Emperor was taking a liberal, generous, compassionate kind of position. But of course, he cannot hold a larger parts of his empire, the vast borders and boundaries and the peripheries. The viceroys and governors, they control it, and whatever they do, the emperor may be ultimately answerable for that. So that kind of a practical issue, of course, was there. But largely in his edicts, he is trying to give maximum what you call decentralized power and self-governance and maximum autonomy to maximum liberty and equality to his subjects. All of them he treated equally. All of them, at least in principle, at least through his words and edicts, we find him addressing all of them as equals and as his own children. That was the liberal position. But of course, we know political limitations are there to this point. If you need to hold that vast empire, you need to exercise some kind of force. That is also true.
And next, my question is that in today's context, we are often reminded that Indian society is very much pluralistic, uh, but it is emphasized that it is a Hindu society, it is a Hindu country, and Hindutva is a civilization, a culture, not merely a religion. So, whatever religious communities live in India, say Muslims or Christians, uh, they must identify themselves as being Hindu, first of all. Now, I don't know uh, about Ashoka's time, but it is true that you said that Chandragupta Maurya, uh, they were initially uh, Hindu, then getting converted into Jainism. You mentioned Bindushar also, Ashoka's father, and Ashoka has been described as Chandashok during Kalinga War. Then gradually he converted to Buddhism. Now, in that context, how this conversion or the dominant Hindu community, their impositions, the question of minorities. But did Ashoka have to face these problems very seriously? Sometimes when I read the edicts, particularly, especially, I think it is 12, number 12 edict about religious tolerance, that Ashoka gave quite some importance on maintenance of communal harmony. Certainly, he did not use the term communal in today's connotation, but a kind of communal harmony. So, can you throw some more light about the similarities and differences between today's Indian situation, the problem of religious conflict, imposition of a monolithic Hindu state, attempts to impose, and whether Ashoka, when he himself subscribed to Buddhism, did he try to impose Buddhism over other religious communities? Because Buddhism was in a ruling dominant position. But I just want to understand what is our heritage, legacy, what we can learn from Ashoka, which will illuminate our understanding, our consciousness about today's problems, today's kind of communal authoritarianism, homogenization, imposition of monolithic religious state. But how, what lessons we can draw from Ashoka's edicts? You have already mentioned a few things, certainly, but if you discuss a little more, I think our audience, including myself, would be very much benefited.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you for that question. Very relevant in the present. So we will see a few. I will read out a few edicts for you so that you get a taste of his philosophy and thinking. In Rock Edict 5, he says, this is from Patrick Olivale's translation here, from his book Ashoka, the Portrait of the Philosopher King. Edict 5, he says, now in times past, Dhamma Mahamatras, he had a different department for the propagation of Dhamma. Dharma was his constitution. The ethics of the Buddha or the Dharma, the universal principles of love and compassion and Maitri, Muditva, Samta, and Karuna. Mahakaruna and Mahamaitri, that was the constitutional law and the book of ethics for him. And therefore, he constituted a department there were many other departments. One among them was the Department of Dharma itself, and he also sent the emissaries of the Dharma, the officials of the Dharma, who were officially paid to propagate the ways of the Dharma among the people. So they are called the Dharma Mahamatras. The Mahamatras, the Odisha, in Odisha, we have the Mahabhatra Brahmins now. They're also having that legacy, the Ashokan legacy of Mahamatras you find in Mahapatras. So the Dharma Mahapatras, he talks about them. Now, in times past, Dharma Mahamatras did not exist at all. But 13 years after my royal consecration, that is his ascending the throne, I established the Dharma Mahamatras. They are occupied with all the Pashandas. Pashandas means the other groups, the heretic groups. It includes the so-called, then there was no Hindu identity as such, you can say, but some Vedic identities, Brahmanical identities, Kshatriya identities, that kind of things were there. Together, roughly, in the current sense, we can say those as Hindu. So when we talk about Chandragupta Maurya and Bindusara also, we cannot say them as Hindu in the current sense, but Hindu in the sense that they were with Brahmanism, they were into the Vedic religion, they were practicing the Varnashrama, or they were somehow categorized by the Varnashramis as belonging to the Kshatriya or the Shudra or some other Varnas. So he talks about the Pashandas along with, Pashandas means the other religious people, or the different people or the heretic groups. So all the Pashandas for the establishment of Dharma and by the increase of Dharma for the welfare and well-being of Dharma devotees among the Greeks, the Kambojas and Gandharas and the Rustikas and Pitinikas, and also among others along the western frontier. So he has sent his emissaries of peace, the Dharma Mahamatras, to various people. And it is only through what you called a kind of systematic education, only through propagation of ideas, that he tried to spread the word of the Buddha. It was never through force, it was never through pressure or coercion or the imperial kind of tactics or military things. So it was a department of education, ethical education, that is, and those educators for the people, they are called the Mahamatras, the Dharma Mahamatras. So that kind of a systematic educational plan, a plan of Buddham or enlightenment, that was there, and a process and institutional setup was also there. Then in Rock Edict 7, he says, Beloved of God, King Piyadashi. That means Devanam Piyadashi. That itself is a traditional kind of, say, we can say an Indian or the so called Hindu in the current sense kind of address that he uses for himself. Devanam Piya and Piyadasi, beloved of the gods. Desires that all Pasandas may reside everywhere. That is a very important thing. The minorities can go anywhere in the empire. They have the freedom of movement, they have the right to life, they have the right to residence. What we now see as Ambedkar has enshrined all these in the chapter 3 fundamental rights, the right to life, the right to work, the right to residence, the freedom of movement, these things. So the Pasandas, you can mark this point, the Pasandas, they have no sort of restrictions, they are equal, and they have a special status. The emperor directly addresses the minorities or the Pasandas and proclaims that they can reside everywhere, they can go and work or reside and do business or whatever thing. They can also believe in their own religion, they can also propagate their religion, so they can reside, go and reside everywhere, the Pasandas, if they desire so. And for all of them, desire self restraint and purity of heart. But you have to be very pure at heart, and that means you have to show the equal treatment to the other. That is the only condition. So you have to be equal citizens and show the consideration for other and equality, then you can go and reside everywhere. The Pasandas have that status, specifically proclaimed by the emperor here. And in almost all the edicts, longer edicts also, major edicts, he elaborates on that. He talks about the gifts that is given to people, and there is no, in Rock Edict 12, he's talking about the equal kind of reward and gifts given by the royalty or the state to the Pasandas. So he talks about the Pasandas are also given all those gifts that are given to an equal treatment even in economic and wealth kind of distribution that should be uh, given to the Pasandas or the people of the other sects or the minorities. So plenty of such reference in Rock Edict 13. He talks about uh, uh, again the importance of non-violence and treating the Brahmins and Shramanas equally. So there is no land, furthermore, except among the Greeks where these classes, Brahmins and Shramanas, are not found. So in my empire, only in the Greek side, you don't find these two groups, but in other parts, you find the Brahmins and the Shramanas as well, and they are to be equally treated. And again, he names Brahmanas, Shramanas, or other Pashandas, any other minorities, any other religious or cultural group, those staying at home and dwelling there, who are well cared for, among whom are established obedience to authority, obedience to mother and father, obedience to elders, and proper regard for friends, companions, associates, and relatives, and to slaves and servants, even to servants, how to show justice and equality. That kind of a concern, not just for the elderly and the poor and the siblings and the children, but also how to treat the servants. Some kind of slavery was also there during the empire. So even to the slaves, there are rights, and equal treatment must be given to servants and slaves. He affirms that they endure there the injury, killing, or deportation of their loved ones. There is no land, furthermore, except among the Greeks, where he elaborates about the prevalence of Brahmanas and Shramanas there. So, in most of the edicts, he is directly naming the minorities, the Pasandas in particular. For Pillar Edict 6, he says, I play close attention I pay close attention to all pasandas. I have paid homage with various acts of homage. So the king himself is saluting and giving titles and homage to various pasandas directly. But individual visits in person is what I consider as paramount. And in Pillar Edicts 8, he says, as to my dharma matras, also they are occupied with various matters that are beneficial. That is to say, both to those who have gone forth and to those staying at home. And they are occupied also with all pasandas. That is to say, I have ordered them to be occupied with matters relating to the Sangha. I have likewise ordered them to be occupied also with Brahmins and Ajivakas. I have ordered them to be occupied also with the Nirgranthas. Nirgranthas are the Nigandhas, or Nirgranthas are the Jains. So Jains, Ajivakas, Brahmins, and all the other heretic groups are named, and their good and welfare are also to be ensured by his ambassadors and emissaries. That is, he's accenting here. So everywhere, in theory, in principle, as per the edicts, he is focusing on the welfare and the good of all the sects and minorities in his vast empire. But practical, of course, practical problems and limitations may be there, of course, that we can understand.
Thank you so much, Professor Shekhar. Uh, it has been a wonderful session. Very interesting. Uh, but Prakash, uh, do you do you have any questions from the audience, Prakash? Prakash Chakraborty has asked a question. What role did Ashoka play in the Buddhist faith?
Okay, thank you, Prakash, for the question. Actually, it is the acts and edicts of Ashoka that made Buddhism a world religion. He began all the congregations. He himself became an upasaka, and his children and his siblings and his relatives, very close relatives of the Maurya dynasty, they became the missionaries. They became nuns and monks, and they propagated the word of the Buddha to various far corners of this continent, and even beyond it to South Asia, to Ceylon, to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Vietnam, Cambodia regions. And of course, he sent them to the Bactrian region, the Greco Roman region, even to Italy. He sent the missionaries. So it is the missionaries of Ashoka, Ashokan Sangha, or the Sanghas, the congregations instituted by the Ashoka. These Sanghas have made Buddhism a great world missionary religion, the first major missionary religion of the world, and a world religion at large. So, whatever we now see as Buddhism that is spread to other South Asian countries and other corners of the world is an outcome of this greater missionary endeavor and the zeal of Ashoka. And also his edicts, the writing, the tradition of writing, the tradition of the constitutional law that is being written on stone. So, all those state policies, the political unification of the continent, the subcontinent of India. Only there are other political, social, cultural, and other things. But briefly, he made a greater India. He made a vast empire, and also the foundations of culture and art and architecture and statecraft and all those things, writing, languages, linguistic policies, linguistic diversity, regional languages being acknowledged in his edicts, the regional variations and the dialects that are acknowledged. So, even the linguistic policy was reflecting the diversity and inclusion of the philosopher king, that is Ashoka. So, whatever we find Indian today is a product of the Mauryan legacy, the Ashokan Empire, and Ashoka was recovered by the West as well. It is the archaeologists of the British tradition. They have reinvented him and they have rehabilitated the memory of Ashoka. And it is the Western scholars and historians who actually saluted him as Ashoka the Great. And only very recently, books were created by Indians or written down by our own people on Ashoka very recently. So, a great work has to be done. Further elaborate work or works have to be done to actually understand and unravel the greater legacies of the Mauryan Empire and the Ashokan Buddhism in particular, which is the bedrock of the Indian civilization, which is the bedrock of the foundation of South Indian culture, the Sangam tradition, not just the North Indian traditions, but South India is also in a civilizational way. It was conceived and founded and elaborated in the Ashokan missionary times. Ashokan missionaries, the nuns of Ashoka and the monks of Ashoka, they have taught us education, public health care, conservation. So these are very important things. Conservation of nature, planting of trees, making of roads and wells and ponds and other conservational kind of activities. So ecologically and culturally, Ashoka has created a greater legacy and model for the present and future, a democratic regime of inclusion, representation, and participation, and a culture of conservation of nature and this planet at large. So it's plenty of things, various things at various fronts in various ways. We need to study it. It is yet to be explored. So that is the challenge that we are into in the present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prakash, any other questions? There is another question. What are the similarities between Ashoka's Dhamma and the teachings of Buddha?
Okay, that we have already elaborated. Whatever is taught by the Buddha as non-violence, as compassion, as Maitri and Karuna and Mudita and Prajna and Ubekha and Samta, these ideals have been taken into consideration by Ashoka, and he made it his constitutional principle, his governing principle. So that is how he made all those edicts, and he practiced it, and he also propagated it, preached it among the people through his missionary groups, and he practiced it in his state policies and decisions and governmental kind of mechanisms, and that is how it's reached the far corners of India. Even in Kerala, there are villages named after Ashoka. That is the interesting thing. I told you his last resort is Kanaganahalli or Sanadi in Karnataka. The Mahachaitya, Adholoka Mahachaitya is in Karnataka. Likewise, in Yeragudi, you have the edicts in Tamil Nadu. In Kerala, also, there are villages like Ashamanur. Ashamanur means the Ur or village of Ashoka Mannar. Ashoka Mannar means Emperor Ashoka or the King Ashoka. There are places like Rayamangalam in Kerala. Raya or Raja is none other than Raja Ashoka, which is in Dhamalipi, it is inscribed in Kanaganahalli, Raja Asoko. Raya Asoko, that is the Dharmalipi inscription in Kanaganahalli under the portrait relief of Ashoka. So Ashoka is also depicted a very popular figure all over India. In Kerala, you have plenty of people having the name Ashok, Ashok or Ashoka, Ashokan. In traditionally in Dravidian, Tamil and Kerala parlance, it is called Ashokan. The people are also called Ashokan people. They are called the Shoga people or Choga people. They are having the Ashokan legacy. The vast majority of people in Kerala. So the Kerala culture or South Indian culture, the Sangham culture, the Sangham literature and Sangham culture, it's all a legacy after Ashoka. So Ashoka has popularized and made the principles of Karuna and Maitri and Prajna and Samatha of the Buddha an everyday reality, everyday democratic practice for the people, and paved the foundation of the democratic cultures of South India from the Sangam tradition, Buddha's own times, from BC 600 onwards. We have from Kiradi, a site near Madurai in Tamil Nadu, we have the Dharmalipi that was recovered. The Ashokan Brahmi or Dharmalipi was recovered. From Kerala, a place near Muziris called Patanam. From the Patanam excavation, Muziri Patanam excavation, Dharmalipi with the graffiti on a pot shed called Amana. Amana means Shramana, that means Buddhist or Jain monk and nun. That graffiti in Dharmalipi was discovered from Kerala, from the Patanam excavation. Carnelian beads were recovered from the Western Ghats regions of Kerala. So, plenty of such Indus Valley, Carnelia connections and Ashokan connections, Ashokan Dharmalipi or Ashokan Brahmi script was recovered from multiple locations in South India and also from Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka, further south, because Sri Lanka was only an extension. Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma, these Theravada countries were only extensions of the greater India. The Indian people were going there and they were coming here. We were having that kind of a cosmopolitan world. So the Buddhist tradition is not a nationalism. It's not a parochial jingoism, but it is a truly international, cosmopolitan, multicultural, democratic, diverse kind of vision that we find in the culture and civilizational foundation created by Ashoka after assuming the philosophy of the Buddha. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Professor Pradip Basu. have any question, please.
There are so many questions still about Sri Lanka, the conduct of Sri Lankan Buddhists, oppression over Muslims, or Myanmar Buddhists torturing the Rohingyas. But lots of questions. One seminar will not be enough for lots of questions. So I will hope to meet Professor Ajay, Sekhar again in this platform in future. Uh, Now, Prakash, if you have no other questions, he must be feeling now tired. It has been enough for one evening, so we can close.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ajay S. Sekhar, sir, and thank you, Professor Pradip Basu. সকলকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ এতক্ষণ ধরে আমাদের সাথে থাকার জন্য। সকলকে শুভরাত্রি জানিয়ে আজকের আলোচনা আমরা এখানেই শেষ করছি। গুড নাইট, গুড নাইট বাসু স্যার, গুড নাইট অজয় শেখর স্যার।
Thanks to everybody. Thanks particularly Professor Ajay Sekhar for this wonderful session.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Prakash. Okay.